Hi, I'm Reverend Nicole Reilley. Welcome to the Clergy Wellness Podcast. This is Season 1, Episode 1, The Gap and the Gain. Let's jump in with a question. Where do we focus our attention? Is it on what isn't working or what is? On where we've made progress or where we're fallen short? On what's ahead or on what's behind? I guess for most of us it would depend on the day, but if you stand back and look at your life and your ministry, where do you tend to fall? I remember being about 15 and having a conversation with my dad, who I'd say is a kind of typical Irish dad. He tells a lot of stories and has a lot of wisdom, and he can also be totally full of BS. One day, we were having cheese and crackers in the kitchen, and he was telling me how being content is the most important thing. He explained that contentment is what gives you peace. And I told him that I thought that was a bunch of malarkey. That life is about being driven, making plans, going places, and that I didn't have any plans to be content anytime soon. I was 15, and life was all in front of me. I didn't want to be content. I wanted to change the world. Pastoring is a great career for someone who isn't on a journey toward contentment, because the local church is filled with things that need to change. If you've been around for a while, you know there are things to straighten out, systems to develop, plans to be made, people to help, and so much more. One day, though, I noticed how exhausted I was feeling. And as I thought about it, I realized in my life and in my ministry, I saw the gap, not the gain. So what's the difference? Well, the gap is the distance between what is and what either could be or should be in our minds. The what could be or should be is usually the ideal. It's a thing that we believe is right and good and perfect, or at least close enough. The gap is easy to see, especially in ministry. The emails from people who tell you that what you're doing is never enough certainly feeds this. But the bigger issue is in others. It's us. If you are wired to see the gap, there can be seasons when it is all you see. The gap between where finances are versus where they should be. The gap between the number of youth and the number showing up to youth group. The gap between church membership and church attendance. The gap can drive you crazy. Has that happened to you? Or maybe you've noticed it in a staff person or key leader? I think a lot of us find ourselves here. But can you notice it today without judging yourself or others about it? I say that because it's easy to fall into feeling guilty for seeing all the things that fall short. We don't want to be negative, but at the same time, we may be really good at seeing the gaps. And we may feel like it's actually one of our jobs to make things better. So, this is you. Give yourself some grace. The gap can be big and wide, and it can seem like it is screaming our name. The gain, on the other hand, focuses on progress. It sees the small things that are moving forward, or at least not moving backward. It celebrates life. It isn't uncomfortable with imperfections, and it understands there's going to be lots of attempts. The gain can be harder to see if we are wired to see the gaps, and who isn't wired to see the gaps? Most pastors don't get a lot of email that celebrate the progress, although I hope you do. To see the gain is to celebrate the 7 people who showed up instead of the 3 who didn't. It is to smile at the person who stumbled as they read the scripture because they were trying. It is to remember that while we didn't hit the Fitbit goal of the week, we got closer than we have in a while. To see the gain is to put aside perfection and to revel in what God is doing, even if it was really small this week. And let's be honest, the gains are often small and they're not linear, and it's forward and then it's backward. And that is, of course, how change happens. Here's the thing. To be well, we have to train our brains to see more of the gains in our life. We have to make an effort. We have to practice. We have to make it a priority. One way we started doing this was at staff meetings. We'd ask, what went well this week? At first, it was a hard question to answer because, aren't we here to fix what was a mess? Well, truth be told, we would get to that too, but it helped to always start with what went well. Some weeks it was things like, even though we had trouble with the mics, it wasn't on every song. Or the live stream went weird, but it came back before the 2nd hour of worship. Or the band made good progress with the new song. Just a couple more weeks and they'll have it down. But as we worked on it, our list became. New people showed up and were welcomed. And more kids were back this week. And people stayed longer for coffee hour and talked. COVID made it easy to see the gaps. And coming back into the building to worship in person seemed to write them in the sky. But the focus on the gaps makes it harder. And life feels hard enough these days. The gap versus the gain idea applies to our personal life as well. I have always struggled to make the time for regular exercise, and so it is easy for me to see the gaps. But one of the things I have noticed is that when I look for the gains, even if they're very small, I see more of them happening. For example, I recently broke my 40-plus week streak of using my rowing machine, and I felt pretty discouraged. But I realized that being disappointed in myself and being discouraged would keep me from getting back on the machine, because I was thinking, what's the point? Instead, I was able to get my mind to see that having a streak like that in my past made it more possible I'd have one in my future. Instead of breaking the streak as a cause not to row, I played with the idea that it was great as summer starts to start a new streak. I find that looking for the small gains gives me hope. It keeps me going. And I cannot imagine another huge streak, but I can imagine the small gains of this workout this week. So, how might we become more about the gains than the gaps? I found this helpful. At night, as I was lying in bed, I would think about the gains for that day. Maybe I got up on time, or I went for a walk. Maybe I answered a difficult email. Maybe I took a break and put my feet up instead of plowing through it. After I could bring 1 to 3 of those to my mind, I would thank God for those things. Then I'd think about the coming day and what was on my calendar. I'd imagine which of those might be a gain, a little bit of progress, either in my enjoying my life more or in moving something forward. Not perfect, but just progress. After I came up with a couple of those, 1 to 3, I'd ask for God's help with them and with help in seeing the gains. Try it. I found that this helped me to see more of the gains in my life. And I found that out of the more gains I saw, the more gains I grew to see. Things started to snowball, and the good grew. And anyway, pro tip, it really isn't worth your time to try and fix things at the church. Yeah, there may be 1 or 2 things worth fixing at the church, especially if you're young and new in your appointment. But mostly, let me just tell you, it isn't worth the time. Instead, start something new. Leave the mess alone. It takes a bit of work, but I am finding that I am training my brain to see more gains and fewer gaps, because gains are a lot more fun to focus on. Let's look at the wellness practice of the week. This is the section of the show where I share something to help us feel better. And this week, I want you to notice how much water you drink. Now, I know this is pretty basic, but the CDC says the benefits of drinking water include it prevents dehydration, which can cause unclear thinking. It helps with our moods. It helps regulate our temperature. It lubricates and cushions our joints and protects our spinal cord. I am a big fan of the Smart Water, but I stopped drinking it because I didn't feel great about all that single-use plastic. So instead, we installed a filter on our sink, and I am working up to drinking 64 ounces of that water daily. I don't always get it in, but I'm making good progress. For me, the key is about keeping it simple and always having a cold bottle of water and keeping it in easy reach. So, be good to you this week and pour yourself a glass of water. What's making this week good? This section is for me to share something that's improved the quality of my life with the hope that it would help you look for little good things. This week, I got my yoga bolster out of the corner and used it to put my feet up while I used my computer in bed. It is not only comfortable to do this, but it enabled my computer to actually work better. For some reason, my computer loves the letter C and likes to type it repeatedly. This gave me a little bit of leverage and made it easier to type. The bolster I have is 25 by 10 by 5, and it's covered with what Amazon calls vegan suede. I bought it for back support with yoga, but I find it is much better to place it on my bed and to use it to hold up my computer or my legs or even a bowl of popcorn. It's a little fun addition to life. So, what's making your week good? Mindfulness meditation. I like to close each of our podcasts with a little bit of mindfulness, just a moment. You can do it with your eyes open or your eyes closed. But wherever you are, take a moment and take a deep breath in and out so that you might relax and be present. I invite you to remember who you are. God's beloved. And then I want to invite you to remember in whose image you were created, the image of God. As I read these words from Matthew, I invite you to breathe them in. May they give you life. Jesus said, "Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy, and my burden is light." Thanks for listening. I appreciate you. I invite you to subscribe, rate and review this podcast, and share it with your clergy friends. You can follow me on Instagram and Facebook at Nicole Reilley Coaching or at my website, NicoleReilley.com. Today, I invite you to make the important choice to embrace a life of wellness. See you next week.